So all about recovery today. And I want John, so no pressure, to kind of set the scene, because everyone will know like recovery is a huge thing. And I was actually speaking to Robin Thorpe the other day, and he was bigging up Warren and the stuff that Hydro are doing. And this is a huge topic, and it's just getting even bigger. But the technology available is, again, just getting bigger and more affordable. So there's so many tools that are out there, as well as the holy trinity that we've talked about on the title of this, the sleep, nutrition, and BFR. So John, set the scene for us, for a practitioner trying to understand what we can trust and what we can't trust.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Good to be on, and thanks for the invite. Gosh, that's an open-ended question, isn't it? I think that, well, look, I'm really fortunate to have been in a number of roles and I guess be challenged with the time course of recovery being one of those really key factors that you've got to play with, or a dial that you can play with as a practitioner, whether you're working with a group of athletes in team sport settings, or like myself, more formally recently right now is working in, or lately I should say, working in individual settings. And where we may, if you will, look at recovery formally more from a what does the training or the competition environment induce and impose, and what can we get away from in a short and acute phase, recovery bouts, if you will, after say intense competition bouts, to then also the training environment. And we kind of dance, I think, and flirt between those two environments, right? What are we doing in the competition area that can really accelerate recovery, return to baselines? And then what are we doing in the training space? Where do we want to go aggressive on recovery, and where do we want to be, say, more passive where recovery is concerned, because we want to support and really pad out the damage, let's say, or the information that we're looking to create from, say, strength training or hypertrophy training. Like, that's an accepted practice, right? So I think as a practitioner, really, what you really need to start with is probably a set of key questions of what are you trying to affect from a recovery point of view? What might be the objections? And I'll start, I guess, quite broad. What might be the objections from the people that you're working with to even utilize certain recovery methods? What's been used historically? What are they comfortable with? What do they like? You'll certainly see this a lot, I think, in, football settings, shall we say. I think it's fair to say that you want to try and pitch the middle ground of where are people comfortable to go with, say a large modality for whether you're doing cryotherapy, whether you're doing ice baths. Do you want to go quite specific and acute with certain things? So you have to try to pick the environmental favorite as well and go with that. Let the people choose almost as well. You're probably going to consider budgets, because that can often be quite a limiting factor when you're going to, say, invest in certain things. I've mentioned cryotherapy there. That's definitely more of a premium option versus you're ready-made, fill up a cold bath and chuck in some ice. So there's a real blend to consider there. Then you're obviously looking at, say, your limitations with time, access to your athletes. What can you do at the training ground or in your training organization? What might you need to consider if you're on the road that's a bit more agile and you can do low cost but high accessibility, ease and use and practice? And then bluntly, what are we looking at from a mechanism point of view? What is it that we're actually trying to physically affect at a mechanistic level that's proven, got some informed evidence behind it, so that we can stand there as practitioners in front of, team coaches, managers, stakeholders, and our athletes to say, we believe this will solve the problem that we've got here. Here's the best use based on all these factors that we've considered. Where would you like to start? And you can almost play with that. So surfing the curve there, I think most athletes and most environments, certainly managers, key stakeholders, want us to bring forth gold standard best practice options and try to implement those in your environment. I've been in certain environments where budget maybe isn't so much of an issue, and you can put in the high end likes of cryotherapy, red light therapy, and you can really go to town on it. That's great, because there's great evidence there too. The other end of the spectrum, where you're working maybe in your change rooms, which is in the stand of your sport competition environment, Scunthorpe United, and you're in doing ice baths, and you've got a little couple of bins that you've filled up from the council. So there's options to play with, but all in all, I want to be able to stand there and say, right, from an informed point of view, what can I suggest with at least enough compelling evidence or anecdotal feedback to say, we feel this will have an impact for you, but we want to bring your motivations into the decision-making process as well. How do you feel about this? are you a good responder? Are you not a good responder? Ice baths, for example, is a really common, I think, area that gets brought up in this space. Some individuals love it, some individuals hate it. So we need to consider individual perspectives as well with this kind of decision-making process. And then I think once you've landed on a middle ground that fits the budget, time, the accessibility, people's interests and motivations, then you probably channel it down to something that you feel we've kind of got a nice middle ground here, which might not be perfect, not the worst, but it's quite ideal for your environment. And certainly, I think in the environment that I find myself in right now, it's very much 50% is probably what the individual's happy to get on with, and the other 50 is what fit the limitations I've got with time. But still holding principle to all of that is, what am I trying to affect and why? Is that a reasonable sort of sketch so far?
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Appreciate that.
Cool.
Warren, you've got a really interesting insight. Obviously, you come from now in the commercial space, but you're seeing so many practitioners, hearing so many stories of exactly what John's just said in multiple sports, in multiple countries, all over the world. How are practitioners dealing with all that, what John's just explained to us, and where does BFR fit into all that?
Yeah, I'm in quite a unique and fortunate position these days whereby I am speaking to all sorts of different sports, both genders, all sorts of different coaches with different practices, which is it's building a really nice picture for me to try and understand the industry as a whole, I guess. And just speaking from my experience first, I worked in pro sports for just over a decade, so not as long as the other guys on this call, not as experienced, to say the least. But I even noticed at the beginning there was a lot more mandating of certain recovery modalities, and now it's moved more to autonomous, self-led recovery menus where you have, pick one from this list, two from this list, and accrue some points. And we're finding, or I perceive that we're finding greater buy-in because athletes are self-leading their sessions. So I've found it's very different between sport. There's a lot of commonalities, common grounds between sports, such as like a bike flush, mobility flows, things like that. But then there's some pretty specific and niche utilities of recovery methods I'm seeing across these sports. But thankfully, what we're seeing with BFR and particularly with Hydro is we're kind of working ourselves seamlessly throughout all of the current practices. And I think we'll come on to it later, but the ability to combine BFR with pretty much any recovery modality you already do, ice baths, saunas, bike flushes, mobility, plyo, stretching, breathing, all these types of things, allows it to step up that ladder, so to speak. So it's not just a standalone passive BFR for recovery. That's great in a certain setting, like on a coach or a plane, when there's nothing else available. But if you're already doing a bike flush, why wouldn't you enhance that bike flush by doing some low-grade BFR at the same time? If we know the evidence is there, so we're seamlessly integrating BFR into existing recovery modalities, which I think is really the beauty of the Hydro product because it's versatile. It's a short that you wear anyway. You're already on the bike, you're already wearing it, just strap in to enhance what you're doing. Jump onto some mobility, jump onto some plyos, and then jump in the ice bath. It's very, very easy. So yeah, I think it's also interesting that I've seen people innovating in clubs. So different sports, they've come to me with ideas. So I didn't know the product could be used in swimming pools, for example. We didn't build it to be water resistant, but it was the Belgium national team. There was a video at the World Cup of them all in the swimming pool. I saw Kevin De Bruyne getting out with Hydro, and I was like, hold on a second, it can be used in a swimming pool? I didn't even think about that. We're now subsequently doing research to back up recovery in the swimming pool. Off the back of that, we've used it in ice baths because we've had a rugby league team saying Helen's use it there, and now several Premier League teams use it in an ice bath. Again, it's building those relationships with coaches, allowing them to innovate with the products, giving them sufficient information to understand the physiology, then go away and do it themselves. And we're building this incredible recovery framework using BFR. And it's only growing every week, to be perfectly honest.
When we're talking about combining the modalities, Warren, what research is out there? I mean, you mentioned that things are going on as we speak, but what research is currently out there around combining BFR and ice baths or BFR and saunas, etc.?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the majority, 99.9% of BFR research is lab-based, clinical-based. And I guess the beauty of what we're doing at Hydro is we're pioneering the applied space. So we have over 20 research studies looking at BFR in the field in the applied setting where it matters, right? And actually, Lucas on the call today is actually one of our teams doing research, which is awesome with Rugby LA. And because of my background, obviously doing the PhD, I'm obviously a published researcher as well. I've always been conscious of making sure that the research we do in a lab is completely reproducible in the field so that it's practically applicable, it's ecologically valid. I was often in situations in club settings where I'd be trying to apply a piece of research that was done in a lab to the athletes in front of me on the pitch. And I was like, there's a few barriers here. There's a few logistical elements I can't circumvent. What do I do? Ended up binning it, didn't do the protocol. So I'm really conscious and aware that every piece of research we do has to be completely reproducible in a lab and on the field to, one, back it up physiologically, and two, showcase and illustrate its benefits in the field where it matters. If you can't apply it in the field, it doesn't matter. Like, you can't use it, right? So that's been incredibly important. It's been incredibly important for us to do. And just to speak to a piece of research that came out, it actually came out a few years ago, but it's really kind of turned my head on a swivel. And it's the synergy and combination of BFR with nutrition. Now, a couple of you guys on the call may know that my PhD was kind of exercise phys, but with a lot of nutrition. A big strand of nutrition was a few of my PhD studies. So I've got a huge interest and expertise in the area. And when I saw this research, which basically showed improved glucose uptake into the limb doing BFR, when you unpack the mechanism there and think, okay, so if you ingest glucose, do BFR, and it's going to push it into the tissues more effectively, think about the ramifications of that for performance. Not only carbohydrate loading into the muscle glycogen, synthesis, but then replenishment post-game for recovery. So once I got on that thought track, I was thinking, well, hang on a second. If nutrition and sleep and possibly stress are the like pillars of recovery, if BFR can enhance nutrition, does it actually end up being a strong contender for an additional recovery pillar? And the reason I think that is you have ice baths, cryo, red light therapy, massage, all these kind of traditionally used recovery methods that have evidence, of course, but they're used standalone for one thing, let's say, typically. If BFR does all that it says it does on the tin, improves recovery hormones, flushes waste materials, and perfuses fresh nutrients into the tissues after a recovery shake, for example, or after a recovery meal, then all of a sudden it becomes a different ballgame. It becomes almost a no-brainer, in my opinion, to use after matches when traveling and the changing rooms on a coach on a plane, because it's driving additional nutrients into the muscle. I don't know why you wouldn't want that. So for me, it's becoming that holy trinity. And it's tongue-in-cheek, of course. Sleep and nutrition are always going to be the pillars of recovery. But I do think BFR has the opportunity to leapfrog and supersede some of the other tools out there.
Perfect. Thanks, Warren. We'll get into more of the research probably interspersed throughout this, but we'll have a bit of a section on it later on. Vasek, just coming to you from a person who's working again in individual sports, individual athletes. Why is BFR? It may just be what Warren and John have just said, but what, in your opinion, why has BFR seen such a huge increase in popularity?
I think because it's getting very simple. I feel like in the past, you almost think that you need a degree to use the BFR. And it was kind of a tool that works well, but sometimes you were cautious that you can harm as well the person. And then right now with all the things that are coming up, it's just very simple to use it. So we are in a gym, we take the shorts and then just cuff them up and then we go work. So you don't need to think really, that the pressure you maintain, it's safe. So you feel kind of, okay, we can try things and you don't really worry about that. That's, I think, is the most important thing.
And how's the athlete that you work with feel about it? What's their feedback?
Well, for us, it was pretty simple because we had some issue in the past with some knee tendinopathy, and there was kind of tool that they come to us and they say, okay, guys, you want to try this? And we were like, okay, we have two options: or we stop playing, which was not what we wanted to do, or we can try this and see if it works, and did. So since then, we just keep working with that, and we have a great results.
So apart from the subjective side, which is obviously super, super important, how are you measuring the effectiveness of the protocols that you're experimenting with?
I mean, it's more like how the athlete feels. It's basically just talking with him and then see, okay, do you feel better after using the BFR or not? Do you see any improvement? And it was basically like that. And then, to be honest, we had pretty good results straight away. So we just keep working with that, and that's basically, we just keep it since, and didn't change much.
So would you mind can you share any protocols that you do use? That is anything any different to what the kind of standard research may take us down?
So we started first, and kind of we call it body prep. So before every training or match, we did kind of like microdosing the BFR. We did some long hold isometrics in the beginning, and then some leg extensions to provide how can I say, just to warm up the tissue and then decrease the pain in the tendon, which worked well. And then we met Ebony Rio in the last Australian Open, and she showed us different modalities. So we just a little bit changed the protocol, but almost keep the same thing. And then what we're doing a lot is the recovery. So every after training or match, we're using the active or passive recovery. That's all.
Do you change anything depending on if you're in a tournament and you've got a quick turnaround, or if it's in training when you've got a bit more of a leeway to play with in terms of the recovery side?
So when we are in a tournament, we try to not change much. I would say that the day we play, we do a little bit less, because we don't really want to bring lots of fatigue. So we're doing less reps in the body prep, and then after the match, we just if the match was pretty tough, we do most of the time passive recovery. When the match was short, we just jump in the bike and just do short active recovery. That's it.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Warren, jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did a podcast with Vasek and Cam the other day, and fantastic quote. You'll have to remind me, Vasek, but he said he's used Hydro BFR more than anyone else on the planet, because he uses it 3 or 4 times a day for the past year or something. It's an awesome quote. But yeah, you use it a lot, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we since Wimbledon last year, we're using it every day. He's using it every day. So he's very used to it, and it's almost like now it's part of our routine. So he travel everywhere with the shorts. He has like 3 or 4 in the back, and it's just something that it's almost automatic. Before he was going in the changing room and changing the shorts. Now he's just in the gym, and he just doesn't care right now. He just put down the shorts. He still have the underwears, but he put down the shorts and put the Hydro on, and then just he's ready to go. So it's something, but we get very used to it. Yeah.
Thanks, Vasek. Just before we dive into the team sports side, John, the Vasek's experiences align with you in working with your individual athlete?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I mentioned when I first started talking, that we're always time pressured from a recovery point of view, especially in congested competition windows. And perhaps one maybe unique example I'll give with another driver we had last year who was doing an all-day test in the Formula One car to they kind of put in a situation where they're vetting their skill set and their ability to perform that car and hit certain markers of performance on the track. And it was an equivalent in the whole day of 2 Grand Prix in one day, which is significant, especially at the pace and the intensity these guys are expected to operate. And we had a natural break at lunchtime. And at lunchtime, we threw on the BFR that we have. And that was a really nice, one reset button for us. But certainly from a subjective view, and we'd used it quite at length, actually, before we got to that scenario. So that wasn't the first exposure, but there was significant improvement in feelings of freshness, reduced muscle fatigue. We understand from at least the research that exists around BFR that you do get a neural improvement of excitation drive as well. So from a CNS point of view, that's quite important, especially for a driver where maybe you're not seeing the type of impacts that you'd say experience maybe with your tennis guy there and or under other, courts or team sport athletes where you're getting impacts. So, that in itself is quite significant for us. So we've used it between sessions, but mostly after sessions.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Lucas, how are you guys using it alongside of the recovery modalities, and you different to these guys working in team sports?
Yeah, no, initially, just like John said at the beginning, it's important for us to set down the big rocks is what we're trying to accomplish. And then on the small stuff, we're in a unique time right now where we're getting a new generation of athletes that value choice and ownership over their performance above all else compared to previous generations of athletes coming into the professional mix. So, at this time in the team, we have very young guys who may be exposed to their first professional environment here. And then we also have very experienced guys who've been in professional scene for a long time. So we try to provide, like Warren said, kind of that menu option where we're providing a lot of different recovery modalities. And the way we've incorporated, BFR this year is just adding it on to, essentially what we're already doing, which is bike flushes. So at the beginning of the week, we are in a congested competition schedule. So when we do our bike flushes post game, match day +2, we're doing active recovery with the BFR on. So, just to give you the example, we might be doing 5 minutes on the bike with the BFR on, strap off for 2 minutes, walk around, come back on the bike. We do that 3 cycles. We're also getting the guys, we live by the beach here in Los Angeles. The water's pretty cold here. So some of the boys go in the morning and, they jump in the ocean. Some have even used the hydros in there, which is really nice to see. They just jump in there. They just, have a chat first thing in the morning. They come into the club and, they're feeling refreshed. So that's one new aspect. And that's something that was not told to them that, hey, try it out in the ocean. They just took the initiative and they said, well, if BFR is helping me in this sense, then I could use it in the ocean, in the cold water. So that's some exciting stuff. And then when we're on the road, obviously we have limited resources, limited time. So we use the passive protocol a lot, whether we're on the bus, on the plane, or in the team hotel. Typically, when we get to a new location, we get together as a team and we do a mobility session, sometimes with the hydro shorts on. So our biggest thing is just providing the choice for the athletes to choose what they feel like works for them. And BFR this season has proven to be just a game changer in terms of just the subjective feedback we get from the players, post protocol. And it's just been very valuable because, going into a session, we might do something like the, pre-session primer with the BFR on, and then they jump in and, research has shown, and I'm sure Warren can extend on this, but there's an acute increase in VO2 max going into activity, doing BFR pre-session. So we're getting a lot of good feedback and just applying it to different modalities, the bike flushes. And it's just been great.
I can almost read John Noonan's mind then when Lucas is saying the LA ocean is cold. He's just thinking the North Sea being absolutely freezing, and Lucas is saying the Pacific's nice and cold. Anyway, Lucas, you mentioned beforehand the research that you were doing alongside Hydro. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. So professional rugby, obviously very long seasons. One of the things that S&C coaches at least see, I guess, a challenge within season is maintaining or improving strength levels in the middle of the competitive schedule. So one of the things that we're looking into now is we're using BFR twice a week as a finisher within our gym sessions because of, the hormonal response post BFR, not having to add additional load. We're trying to evaluate whether our BFR group is able to maintain or even improve. We're trying to push that envelope, trying to improve strength levels throughout the season. So right now we're halfway through our in-season period. We tested preseason, both upper and lower extremity strength, and then we'll be testing postseason to see what the changes were. Throughout the competitive schedule, we're also measuring RPE levels. So we're getting their subjective feedback. And the really nice thing is when we've seen a trend that RPE levels have started to go down as they're getting more and more familiar with the protocol. And, they kind of come in the gym already and they're like, oh, hydro finisher. Yep. All good. So they go and get it done. But the other aspect of that I'm kind of monitoring, but it's not quite a variable that we're reporting in this research is we take HRV measurements every morning with the players when they come in. And the HRV levels of the group with BFR seems to be higher than the group without. There may be some context to that. There's positional differences, but it's a really interesting thing for further research. So I'm just excited to see what the changes are in terms of once we do our strength testing postseason, if the BFR actually improved or maintained strength levels more than the control group.
Love it, Lucas. So just a reminder, Robin's already cracking on with the questions, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. I hope there's more to come. Put your questions in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end. If there's loads, we'll just bring those questions forward so we make sure we get as many as we possibly can. I mentioned that we were going to dive more into the research side of things, Warren. I'd love to get a bit of an overview or brief overview of where we're at, but then a bit of more in-depth insight into what's coming and what research you guys are doing to kind of back up, obviously, what we're saying here about the usage across the world.
Yeah, so I mean, if you type blood flow restriction training into PubMed, it's growing exponentially, has done for the past 10, 15 years. It's a curve like this, so there's a lot more research every single year. And actually, if you look at cold water immersion, massage, cryo, if you combine all of them, it's actually not as much as there is in BFR, which is crazy considering how established they are versus BFR in practical sense. It's because of the product, which is why we made Hydro, but neither here nor there. So with regards to the research that's mainly emerging in BFR, it's all been in rehab to date until about 10 years ago. Now we're starting to look at things like strength, hypertrophy, VO2 endurance, recovery, preparation, tendinopathies, things like that, things that are practically applicable in sports. And research that we're doing, as I say, is we're doing the same research in a lab as we're doing in the field. But the lab piece of research would be, for example, recovery BFR, looking at the physiological mechanisms and looking at performance testing after doing prior to BFR and post BFR. In the field, we're doing the same kind of protocols, so 3x5 with 2 minutes off, for example, passively, but we're doing it in rugby, cricket, soccer, AFL. We're doing it in all sorts of different sports, and we're going to compare them at the end. And we're also going to write a paper that combines both genders, compares and across different sports. So it'll be a really nice paper. At the moment, I've got to caveat this and say, because there isn't a heap of objective data and it's a lot of subjective data, which for the record, there's a lot of it, and it's very, very well set up in terms of mixed models, crossover designs, like it's very well run. But because there's no objective data, I didn't want to try and publish each individual white paper or each individual study for now. I wanted to combine them at the end and just have a really nice applied research BFR piece. So as it stands, I think I mentioned before, we've got well over a dozen research either finished, ongoing, or about to start in the applied setting. So again, across various sports. The majority is in recovery because it's probably the majority of the use of our products, but we are looking at preparation BFR, so looking at enhancement of performance, as Lucas was saying, as a primer, essentially. What do we get from that in terms of in the gym or on the pitch? Do we get improved exercise capacities, improved lifts, lower RPEs? And we're also looking, of course, at rehab and tendinopathies. But with regards to recovery, which should be 85% of what we're doing, across the board, across both sexes, across every sport, we're seeing a significant improvement versus a sham control from doing passive BFR post-competition. And as I said, we've done that in a lot of different sports. What we are seeing is a more pronounced effect in higher muscle mass individuals. So we're seeing the recovery deficit is typically higher, and the recovery improvement is typically higher for rugby players, for example, versus soccer players. But there's still a significant enhancement for soccer players as well. And then take that male versus female too. There's a slightly more pronounced recovery effect we're seeing in males versus females. But that stands to reason given the higher muscle mass and typically the higher demands of those sports. And the subjective markers we're looking at is muscle soreness, upper and lower body. We're looking at joint pain, upper and lower body, and we're looking at fatigue. And what we're seeing is acutely, straight after using passive BFR, whether that's immediately post-game or on a coach or on a flight or whatever, acutely post that, so immediately after, we're seeing a significant improvement versus a sham control. For the record, a sham control is basically the shorts on applied on setting 1, which is only delivering 50 to 60 milligrams of mercury of pressure. That's not going to help with recovery, but it feels like it might because it's still the strongest pressure, but it won't help. But we're using that as a control. And then because we're doing a crossover and we're doing it over 10 to 15 games per team, we're getting a lot of data. And again, we're seeing acutely an impressive difference. But then the really important thing, I think, is 2 days later, we're seeing athletes come back after doing habitual recovery, whether that's ice baths, cryo, whatever they do habitually, which we've recorded. Because it's a crossover, we've got comparable data. And we're seeing a significant difference again between that one exposure to passive BFR post-competition. And we're seeing anywhere from like 10 to 20% difference in muscle soreness, joint pain, and slightly more pronounced in fatigue. So we're seeing some pretty impressive results. We're then also, I think I mentioned before, using it in water. So off the back of that, we did an ice bath plus BFR study with recently promoted, actually, Oxford United in the championship now, thanks to BFR, of course. And what they did is, caveat, it's important for me to say they did because we aren't running the studies. We're planning the studies. As Lucas has just said, he's running it. So we're very impartial. Like whatever happens, happens. So that's an important point. What they did is they did their typical ice bath protocol, which is a very cold 7 degrees. I think it's about 45 Fahrenheit, something like that. It's very cold for 4 minutes, one exposure, versus passive BFR, 5 minutes times 3 with 2 minutes off in between to flush, versus ice bath, 4 minutes, 7 degrees with BFR applied. And what they found was pretty similar in terms of muscle soreness, joint pain, and fatigue between the BFR only and the ice only. BFR was slightly stronger, but there was a massively pronounced impact when you combine modalities. And I saw Robin's question, so I'll speak to the cold water immersion one first, since I'm on that study. The hypothesis for the mechanism, because it is a hypothesis, because we need to take that to a lab and look at that properly with probably muscle biopsies and salivary creatine kinase and whatnot. But anyway, the proposed mechanism is the ice bath is going to deliver the cold shock proteins, of course. It's also going to deliver some blood flow restriction to some effect, right? It's the capillaries obviously go closer to the core of the body. And by adding BFR on top of that, we're going to pronounce that blood flow restriction effect. We're going to cause more swelling in the muscle cells, which are then going to swell and create muscle protein, upregulate muscle protein synthesis. And then when we get out, when we unstrap and cause that flush, because of the blood that's locked in, that pressure differentiation is going to cause a really drastic flush, which wouldn't happen normally with ice. That capillary refill takes a while. But when you do BFR, that capillary refill is much, much quicker. Plus the flushing, plus the hormonal upregulation, plus the driving of fresh nutrients into the muscle tissues. So when you start to like map it all out and look at the bullet points, it makes sense scientifically that they would enhance one another. And we are seeing that subjectively. We do need to look at that objectively now in a lab setting, but there's no harm. There's definite anecdotal evidence. It's something I would highly recommend doing. In terms of the nutrition studies, so that's only something I've become aware of recently, strangely enough, but it's something that really has, as I said, turned my head for the research, and it's something I'm going to focus on heavily, because if we can prove that BFR drives, it improves flow transportation of glucose into the muscles, if we can prove that it drives more amino acids into the tissues to help, regenerate tissue, if then we can prove collagen, if that can be driven into the tendons and ligaments after a collagen shot post-competition or post-rehab, we're now looking at an entirely different product or different utility for that product. It's not just recovery because of the hormones or because of the flushing. It's now recovery because it's enhancing nutritional intake. And that's a really important finding. So we're now collaborating with Manchester Met Uni to do that research moving forward, which is pretty exciting.
Very good. Very thorough. So we've got a couple more questions, which I absolutely love. Keep firing them in, keep Q&A, chat, whatever it is. And we'll get to those at the end. The more we get, we'll bring those forward to make sure we try to get through them all. I just want to put this out there to John, Vasek, and Lucas. Come to you first, John. One big thing about that's kind of a theme running through what you've said, what Vasek said, and what Lucas said is the accessibility and the ability to recover on the move while traveling. Yours is like pretty exciting. There's you and the athlete are traveling all over the world, flying, driving, whatever it is. Give us a bit of an insight into how you use it whilst on the road, which is pretty much all the time. Like, as soon as he gets out of the car, what's happening?
Yeah, look, you're spot on. I think that's, if I'm completely honest, the versatility aspect of this is the most attractive for sure. I've been fortunate to use the motorized one before it, and that's great, but it just doesn't lend itself to the versatility that you described there, especially when you put it in, say, your luggage and you're traveling. So we typically would have two options depending upon time, scheduling, where we are, for example. But after an event, after a race, for example, we can either do it in the driver room after the event itself, but consider that we're getting pulled sometimes around. Media can change. It's quite a fluid schedule as well, to be honest. So if that time isn't protected as we'd like, then we'd agree to do it back at the hotel, where then, I guess like most behavioral tactics, we want to piggyback one behavioral activity on top of another one because we guarantee its effectiveness or its completion. So we would just have them do a passive protocol in the hotel room, and they can be on the phone with a family or a friend, which they're typically doing of an evening when they've got some quiet time, or watching TV or on the phone or something. So it's nothing too special other than we just make sure that as a touch point, it's either done close enough after the event itself. Worst case, it's done further into the evening, and we're doing your classic passive 3x5. To a point that you made, Lucas, before, I've anecdotally seen actually as well, and this is more so in the previous driver who I had for 3 years, who was using hydro religiously after sessions, after races, most weeks of the year, that I would see spots and trends of HRV also being influenced and being improved from uses prior to, say, sleep, when it wasn't used prior to sleep. Like you say, the caveat, there's other factors to consider, such as, overall global load, types of training sessions that can be done, or, the amount of efforts and competition that are taking place. But nonetheless, it's at least a clear finding that I've seen as well. And whilst we don't believe, you might correct me here, Warren, I don't believe there is any research currently that is pointing toward BFR being an assister of sleep, or improving of sleep. But what we do know is that we do want to trigger athletes back into rest and digest, because that level of autonomic regulation is really important for us to get back to homeostasis. So if BFR, we know, can do that from a parasympathetic drive after use, then maybe it's suggested that could be a contributor to improving sleep quality as well, or overall sleep. So
amazing. Thanks, mate. Warren, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think always want to jump in, mate. You know me. There's a lot of hypotheses that are floating around my head anyway for BFR, because I'm living and breathing it every day. But when we understand the foundational underpinning science of BFR, we're modulating blood flow to different degrees to try and achieve a different outcome. You can then think, this is why teams are innovating. This is why our athletes, Lucas, are going in the water with it, because intuitively it makes sense to enhance something you're doing. But scientifically, it makes a lot of sense too, that these mechanisms would be improved by adding an additional stress like BFR. So in terms of research, I think there's going to be a whole new litany of research that's going to be started because of products like Hydro, because it's more accessible, because you can do full squad research papers instead of one-on-one in a clinic or a lab setting. And I think we'll find out some pretty cool stuff in the next few years because people are trying to innovate.
Amazing. Thanks, mate. Vasek, anything? Obviously, you're in a very similar position to John, maybe not as regularly, sometimes every weekend, but it's a similar on the road all the time, flying, driving, whatever it may be. Is that anything different from what John mentioned with his athlete?
I don't think that our biggest problem is just the scheduling, because in tennis you rarely know you know when you start. Sometimes it depends when you start of the day, but you never know when you finish. So we need to be really adaptable, and we're using the Hydro. I mean, sometimes happen that you finish 2 o'clock in the morning and the player just want to leave and go to the hotel, but he still needs to eat. He needs to still do a media. So sometimes we try to just, okay, you done, or you go on a bike, but sometimes we say like, okay, I'm done. I just want to eat, do media and go. So we do the Hydro when he's eating. and then just go straight to the media and go home and go sleep. So for us, the biggest issue is just we don't know. We don't have like schedule. It's just adaptation. You win, great. You on the next day. You lose, okay. We take our stuff and we move on. So that's the biggest difference for us.
Amazing. Right, we'll come to Lucas and then we'll dive into some questions. So not last chance to get some questions in, but before we kick that off, Lucas, so you were traveling as well. You're traveling hours now, as you mentioned, a trip to the East Coast, 6-7 hours on a flight. Anything different from what the guys said there?
No, I mean, I think it's pretty similar. It's just obviously the amount of time spent on the plane, let alone on the plane, just on travel, going on a bus to the airport, waiting at the airport, getting on the plane, and then just trip back to the hotel. Really what we're trying to do there is just maximize the amount of movement and blood flow that they're getting, because there's plenty of research. If you sit there, you let the blood pool and you're not getting enough oxygenated blood into those limbs, right? Then when we talk about flush, we're just trying to continue to circulate blood through the system. So we have a freedom for the players to choose if they want to do it on the plane or if they want to do it on the bus. Very similar. But we talk a lot about the shorts, but the other exciting thing is I'm just speaking on Hydro. They also do the shirt, right? For the BFR, and rugby being a contact sport, a lot of the things that we've been doing, especially in season, is we do see a spike in upper extremity injuries or soreness, AC joints and whatnot. And we use a lot of the passive protocol on the upper limbs as well, with the shirt, especially when we're on the road, to kind of get those guys primed for game day. So I think that's the only difference. But again, just the length of travel, we just try to use it as much as possible, since it's so safe, like everybody else alluded to, that there's no specific time frame. We just whatever they find most convenient at the time of travel, we just incorporate it there.
Love it, Lucas. Thanks, mate. Right, bang on the 15-minute mark to go. First question is a reminder to myself to ask you, Warren, for the research paper that you mentioned 15 minutes in, which I think was the nutrition one from a few years back. So that's a reminder for me to ask you. So basically passing the book to you. Have you covered off Robin's question? So I'll just give people the context. So cooling and heating independent of BFR elicit different responses or outcomes. Therefore, what is the proposed effect of BFR on both cooling and heating responses? Is there a possible contradiction to one of these temperature-based modalities? Have you covered off what you said there 15 minutes ago? Okay.
Oh,
do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't know what we don't know yet. It's not been tested. We're innovating and trying new things out all the time. And that's the beauty of what we're doing, really. We're innovating with coaches from different teams who are just willing to try these things. So the ice, I obviously explained the proposed mechanisms there. That's what I think. That's what I believe. And we're seeing beneficial outcomes from that. The contrast bathing, so hot and cold, it's not been researched, but there is a team doing it. So St. Helens Rugby League, they do 1 minute in cold, 1 minute in heat, and they strap in for the cold and unstrap in the heat. And the thought process that I was told from Matt Daniels is strapping in the cold is obviously accelerating the blood flow restriction process, causing some swelling, getting the heat, flushing, and the heat is obviously going to also, the hot shower is going to accelerate that flushing. Now, again, I don't know if that's physiologically the case, but we will look at that in a research study. And furthermore, we're going to look at, first of all, the ice bath study with salivary inflammatory markers, but I'll probably do it with contrast too and have a look at that. So I mean, I don't really have a robust answer other than we will be looking into this, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend I have all the answers at this point, but it's an interesting area that's worth exploration.
Perfect. Thanks, mate. Right. A question to all. Have you found that BFR as a recovery modality lends itself better to certain sports or perhaps certain parts of your season? I mean, I think we've pretty covered off the fact that we've got motor racing, tennis, rugby, that it's applicable to all sports. But in terms of parts of the season, Warren, have you, and I'll come to you first, and feel free to jump in, the rest of the guys. Have you seen that people are using it more and periodizing it for different parts of the season? We covered that off a little bit with periodization of that, but give us your insight.
Yeah, a little bit. There's one interesting utility for recovery, particularly in a certain part of the season, and that's in pre-season. So I'm a big advocate of bathing in inflammation. I think most people here would, and driving physiological adaptation in the pre-season. That's the aim of a pre-season. However, I mean, that's when you don't do ice, that's when you don't do cryo, for example. However, because BFR causes an upregulation in muscle protein synthesis pretty heavily as well, and other various recovery markers, the flushing that it achieves, so removal of inflammatory markers, is, we believe, offset by the increase in muscle protein synthesis. So if you were going to do a recovery modality, it's one that's potentially going to enhance your adaptations versus blunting them like other modalities would. Again, needs to be researched. It's a hypothesis, but there are teams that have gone ahead and done this, particularly in rugby league. They're doing preseason with HydroBFR as their recovery method, which has been interesting.
Any additions from the guys at certain times of the year?
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Lucas.
You know, we used it in preseason as well this year. But the other thing is from rugby perspective, and this is just me thinking long term. One of the sports that would probably benefit actually quite extensively from this is rugby sevens, given their multiple matches in a day, trying to recover the guys quickly on for the next competition. It's something that I haven't seen in the field before. But it's definitely, it would be interesting to see how it affects the competition. But like Warren said, we're trying to drive adaptation, and we noticed that using BFR in the preseason was just helping us achieve even more.
A shout out to Dan Howells here. So Dan Howells is my old line manager at England Rugby Sevens. He did use it in between competitions with select players. I remember him running them, in fact, with BFR on Twickenham in between games. So yeah, he did do that. But I think it's got a massive place for tournament athletes in between games for sure. Great shout.
Perfect. One that I'd actually written down myself that I'm glad somebody's come out with. I think it's about 4 questions in one. And a few of you have used the term. So the term flush gets used extensively in our space, especially in relation to recovery modalities, massage, etc. What do we actually mean by flush, Warren?
Me again.
Yeah, sorry.
It's no. It's
Peppering
great.
you.
It's not necessarily a very robust scientific term, let's be honest, but it's a very visual. It's easy to understand. And there are different degrees of flushing, as anonymous attendee I was looking for a name there, has written. So like your compression boots, they're graduated compression, they're moving lymph, they're flushing in effect, but it's kind of just moving it and like massaging it out. With BFR, because of the intensity of the pressure buildup, particularly if you've done active recovery BFR, I mean, your muscles are swollen, they're veiny, they're popping, they're slightly discolored because they're so swollen. When you release that, you can feel that flush. You can physically feel the blood moving. You can feel the hot cold sensation in the limb. You can feel the limb reducing in volume almost immediately, which is a flush in inverted commas, but it's just the transference of fluids, I guess, from the tissue. So is the scientific term flushing? I don't know, but it's the easiest way to explain it in the visual, I guess.
Part 2 of that, are all flushes equal?
I guess I just kind of spoke to that point, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it depends how much pressure you're applying. If you're doing a graduated compression with 100 milligrams of mercury versus 200, that's not going to move lymph as well, is it? So they're not equal. I guess it depends on the severity of the pressure, I guess. But there is a limit to that too for safety.
Just on that feeling, I'd love to get the views of the guys, especially individuals that you're working super, super closely with. Does that feeling, is that feeling a one that you have to kind of persevere with at the start because that makes them unsure? Or is that, in terms of using BFR, or is that kind of addictive that you get that feeling? John, Vasek?
I think it depends who you're working with, and maybe to some extent personality types that go with that as well. So for example, working in rugby circles, they usually aren't too shy, maybe you agree, Lucas, of putting in a shift on a Friday afternoon and going for the gun show. Like they like this, the pump, the swell, the aggressiveness that comes with that. It's a very visceral feeling. I quite like that. I'm a bit strange in that way as well. If you speak to someone that maybe isn't from that kind of background, let's say rudimentary training, I have noticed them to be a little bit more sensitive, and it is a lot more acute as a sensation that they would experience. Is there therefore some kind of morphological difference that architecturally within the tissues allows them to have, say, greater tolerance to that sensation and that limb occlusion pressure? Maybe, Warren, you can touch on that. Perhaps maybe that's the difference piece there as well, because I'm talking about bigger guys, bigger limb girths over here to, much smaller individuals over there. So that's probably a factor as well. But I think it largely just come down to the temperament to somewhat and their training background and experience within those sorts of methods too.
Vasek, any experiences from your perspective?
Well, I tried on me and I really like it, but I'm more the rugby guy. I'm not a tennis guy. So, but yeah, Cam he likes it as well, and it's just a feeling that release the pressure, and you feel really light and almost kind of like a new man. So it's something that definitely you get used to it, and you want to do it every day almost.
Cool. Just to keep the heat off Warren a little bit, because I think this might be interesting to get the perspective from John and the rest of the guys. With BFR becoming more accessible and research in elite sport, how do you see the use of it growing in amateur and fitness space? And how can athletes get the most out of it? I'm interested in that because that's a positive, and moving into that fitness space will be interesting as well. John, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've been probably one of the avid supporters for some time of Hydro, and just sitting on the fence and seeing how this thing grows out, and what's gone from very clinical settings with BFR and looking at research over 2 decades ago to now in the applied setting, but seeing it through motorized cuff devices to now what we have here, which is a more safe, more efficient tourniquet effectively that's been tested. So I think through that it has spread like wildfire, and conversations I had with Warren probably several years ago now, right, where we talked about the alpha male space, the female fit training space, and it's gone massive. And I think trending in the gyms and wearing lycra type kit is very, very on vogue these days as well. And I think what's come with that, and maybe quite fortunate at the right time, is that kind of BFR and the word that goes with that, especially with Hydro, kind of fits that build right now, if you will. So the uptake has been exponential from what I've seen. And I think in some respects as well, like many modalities that I guess as practitioners we feel quite comfortable with, when we're seeing the evidence from elite sport and we're seeing the case studies come through, then most likely, it's the Joe public, they read things online, they see it on Instagram, they're following the suits, they're following the trends that go with the elite professionals that seem to be wearing these sorts of things as well. So it's following the trend for sure, as far as I can see.
Heat's coming back on you, Warren. Are you seeing that from a business perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it from near the beginning as well, Rob. It's growing exponentially. The research is growing exponentially. I mean, we're in nearly 150 teams at this point across the world, which is, a pinch me moment, to be perfectly honest. It took 2 years to get the first 30 and then 1.5 years to get the rest. It's a domino effect, and it speaks to the beauty of BFR, I think, and the experience that you get. When you can experience BFR, you understand it. When an athlete sees, feels, and experiences it, they get it, they buy in. If you get buy-in from an athlete, the coach buys in because they've got something the athlete enjoys that is scientifically backed up, and then it's just a win-win. And we have the easiest delivery system for that. So we're definitely seeing that exponential curve and the awareness grow for sure.
I'm just seeing that. Oh, go on, mate.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing because, John touched on this about players and amateur athletes seeing their professional sports and the people they idolize using BFR. And another big aspect, aside from accessibility, is the safety that comes with it. How much research there is back in the safety of using BFR. So when we talk about amateur athletes, just having the ability to use what the pros are using with no real or high risk, to use it on your own and experiment with it is something that, it's just spreading like wildfire, because as long as we're doing our job in educating them on the proper use of BFR, then we can be comfortable in them experimenting on their own. And then you'll see, youth teams and tennis players and players athletes from all over every sport using BFR. So just the education side and the safety, it's massive in terms of the growth of using BFR in amateur sports.
I was going to say, we've got 2 minutes left. I saw Warren was typing a reply. Are we keeping that just between you two, Warren, or shall we? Okay. Do you want to? I can't see it now. Just give us a bit of. So Robin had messaged a scenario that said a football player had played, but they were playing 24 hours later. What recovery modality would you use, and would you use BFR? That was a scenario. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I basically sent a link to a piece you published the other day from Ellie Mabry, because she gives an incredible, very detailed, practical recommendations of BFR around a microcycle, and it literally explains every single day how she would apply BFR. And the answer, in short, is ice cooling plus BFR, either in the ice or passively separate too, but as a part of the recovery. So yes, absolutely recommended BFR and cooling at that point. But if no one can see it now, that's a shame. But if you can put a link in the footnote.
That's all right. Yeah, that's fine.
It honestly, it's an incredible, you've read it yourself. It's an incredible. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.